Today, we wanted to have a conversation about when to use cash, when to use credit, and when to use policy loans for one's business, right? And although this conversation might be one that can be taken for granted, I actually think that there is a lot of value to the conversation because I believe I would love your opinion on this, but I believe cash is king. And I used to say this
Definitely.
at the BNI events that cash is king, credit is queen, right? Cash is
Mhm.
king, credit is queen, because I would prefer to leverage credit rather than using the cash that I have on hand. But what would be your take on that, Eunice?
I agree. You always want to have some type of leverage, right? If I can get something on credit and then expand and go do another thing with the cash that I have or grow, why not? Um, Leverage to me is what helps you grow the business. Whereas, when I use cash, once I've paid for whatever I need, it's gone, right? But if I can make that dollar stretch a little bit more, why not?
Well, the thing is, cat when you are paying for an item and you're using credit, you like literally have access to that without any interest that you're paying. So for instance, if
Hmm.
you're on the net 15, that basically gives you an opportunity to um to get the supplies that you need, right? So if you are in the construction business per se and you need wood and paint and other materials to complete the job, I think that it would make sense for you to want to use credit, right? Because now you basically have given yourself some float, right? And just in case if you run into any issues with that job and you still have to pay your employees, right? You still have that cash where you would be able to pay those employees, but you still have leveraged the credit, and the credit is going to be available. And if you're doing like a net 30, you have 30 days to pay that thing in full.
And not only that, like once you do that, that means that you are continuing to build your business credit because now that transaction is going to be reported. And that's what we're looking for with establishing credit to ensure that there is those transactions that happen and creditors can see that yes, you do take out and then you pay back and all the wonderful stuff.
Okay. So let's kick this off by saying most businesses, because what we're doing here with VIP business credit, VIP insurers, etc., is we're having a conversation about helping business not only to survive but thrive past year 5, right? The opening slavo will be most businesses do not fail because they lack revenue, where a lot of businesses do fail because they lack revenue. They fail because they don't know which money to use and when to use it, right? So every dollar that you have in your business has a specific job, right? And if you look like this from that perspective, that every dollar in your business has a specific job, it's similar to the people who you are hiring inside of your organization, right? You
Hmm.
hire people so that they can be taking naps in the middle of the day. You're hiring because they're going to do something that either you don't want to do or you're not very good at. So you hire people to fill in those gaps where you don't actually have strengths, right? So if that is the case where every dollar has a job in your business, then you basically put on the hat in the perspective that cash, credit, and policy loans are now tools, right?
Mhm.
So here you are as the carpenter trying to determine which tool do I need in order to complete the job. And this decision has to be made not from emotions, but now having the right type of tool to be able to complete that job, right? You never want to try and use a hammer when you could have used a screwdriver, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk about it. What would be a wrong decision if you are not making the right decision about what is the right tool to use? There are consequences to every single decision that is made when it comes to business. Using the wrong tool can lead to slower growth, right? We always are having conversations with business owners and entrepreneurs because they aren't advertising to bring in the right kind of lead for their business, right?
Mhm.
Or they have used cash when they could have used credit. And the consequence of that is now they have impacted their liquidity, right? Or when they could have used cash, they used credit, but because that credit is now coming at inflated terms, it's costing them more.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's an easy decision to determine what should I use when. It's going to vary from business to business. However, I do believe that it is important to just know the options that you have and to know what each one really represents and how much it costs in the back end for that. For example, you just mentioned using a credit card when you have the cash, with knowing that that credit card potentially has a higher interest rate. Then it becomes a question of, did you use the credit card and not pay for it for 2, 3 months? Or did you use the credit card and pay it off? How did you use it? So, what's important is really acknowledging and knowing that, yes, I have an option to use cash, credit, or a policy loan, but when is the best time to use either, especially with the understanding that with both a credit card and a policy loan, there has to be paid back. So, how do you determine all those things?
Well, you're right, but when you make a decision that isn't the right decision, what you have just done is you have increased the risk to the business,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've opened up the conversation around which ones to use. Let's talk about the different types of capital that you can have in your business. So basically, if I wanted our user to take one thing away from today, right? Right, we're going to teach our audience how successful business owners think about capital, right? So the biggest takeaway that they could have for today is successful business owners have a different mindset when it comes to capital. So let's talk about cash, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's your most expensive capital, right? Because cash, a dollar spent today is a dollar that cannot be invested tomorrow. So then that means that there's going to be an opportunity cost for using that dollar today,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It also reduces your liquidity, but it might feel safe, but it actually stunts your growth. right? Because that cash that you spent today cannot be invested in marketing or in hiring because it's now tied up in equipment or in another asset to the business. So
Mhm.
the biggest takeaway is that cash is your most expensive capital because there is an opportunity cost when you use it and it can't be used in two places, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Let's talk about EIN based credit. What are some of the pros of EIN based credit, right? Now, if you're using credit, we just talked about using cash reduces liquidity. So then that means just the immediate offset for using credit is the fact that it preserves liquidity, right? And one of the best things that you could ever do is use OPM, is what we call it. But now you're leveraging OPM, which is other people's money, right? And in addition to using business credit, right, there is a short term impact because you are creating the trade experiences, but there is the long term impact because the long term impact means that as funding sources give you access to capital, others are looking at you being granted capital and giving you access to more capital. So by using business credit, there is a short-term effect as well as there is a long-term effect at the same time, right? And one of the things that we always have mentioned time and time again is that you should try to only use your EIN in order to gain access to this capital versus providing a personal guarantee. And if you are in business greater than 12 months, you should be leveraging your EIN the strongest because now you already have those trade accounts and you have those relationships at the same time, right?
Yeah.
But the last piece that I have on this one is that you want to be leveraging relationships with vendors who are reporting to the commercial credit reporting agencies such as Dun and Bradstreet, Experian Business, and Equifax Business. Otherwise, it's like opening up the window in winter and letting out the heat. There is no juice that comes out of that squeeze, right? So those are the things that I would leverage to make sure that you are hitting in the right areas, right? The last
Mhm.
one, Eunice, talk about policy loans, in particular, whole life policies.
Well, one of the great ones is that when you do that, when you use your policy loan, there's no credit check. So nobody's going to run your credit. There's no loan approval process. You just fill
Hmm.
out a document for admin purposes to specify how much you're looking for and your details so that the insurance company can record that. And you are actually borrowing against your own capital. So you're not you are using your policy as collateral so that you can get funds from the insurance company. And one of the other things, depending on who your policy is with, is that you when that interest continues to compound on the actual full cash value versus just compounding on what is currently left in the account. So if the account has a full cash value of 50,000 and you took out a loan for 20, you're still going to get your interest continuing to compound on the 50,000, not just on the balance. And it's a loan. So it's a loan and it's not considered income, so it's not taxable. Those are just some of the things that you want to look at when you're looking at using or determining whether you should use those policy loans. All these advantages that come with it are worth looking into and then deciding, okay, should we go with this policy loan to grow our business?
Well, we're not going to double click into it, but that is really called non-direct recognition for anyone who is in the space of trying to decide which mutual insurance company they are going to
Mhm.
leverage. They definitely want to have a conversation on what is direct recognition versus non-direct recognition. I've had this conversation many times on many different forums. I believe that if you are going to leverage the policy for loans, then you want to go with a non-direct recognition policy because that recognizes the full cash value regardless of whether there are any loans that are outstanding. It makes sense. If I'm going to use it, I want to be in a position where I am using the cash correctly. And this is a conversation, and the topic for today is, when do I use cash? When do I use credit? And when do I use policy loans? Right? All of them have different pros and cons. But let's transition it a little bit and talk about strategy, because this is where entrepreneurs that I have seen and have experienced are actually getting it wrong, right?
Mhm.
So, when should they use cash? And we started to talk about this earlier at the top of the call, but when should a business owner use cash? Covering payroll, right? The bank is not going to allow for you to let others cash checks if there is no cash in the account, right? So leverage cash when paying payroll, covering short term operational expenses, small expenses that do not generate an ROI, and definitely avoid things such as high interest short term debt, right? You want to use cash when those scenarios are present, right?
Mhm.
But the inverse of that, when you flip that coin onto the other side, you want to know, when do you want to avoid using cash, right? So we said use cash for things like covering payroll, covering short term operational expenses, right? When do you want to avoid using cash? When purchasing assets that generate revenue, avoid using cash. Making marketing investments without measurable emphasis on measurable ROI. And right? Buying equipment that can be financed, right? Would you add anything to that list?
No, I think that covers everything. And this might not be part of the conversation. However, when it comes to those policy loans, when you do use those, for example, to buy equipment, one of the wonderful things, of course, is that you don't have to, when you get that loan out, you don't have to specify when are you going to pay it back, how are you going to pay it back, and nobody's going to verify that you actually have income or funds to be able to pay it back. However, it is very important to pay back, because if you do not pay back, or if you don't make arrangements to make sure that at least you pay that loan, all that means is that next time when you're looking for more cash, it will not be there because you didn't put back. So you want to practice the concept of, we talk about this all the time, Lee, where we say, hey, if you have a grocery store, if you walk in every day and get a pack of chips and cookies and whatever you want and eat that, eventually it's going to show on your bottom line,
Yeah,
right?
we would have
So,
that problem with kids. They would walk in and all of a sudden chips are missing, candy bars are missing, candy is missing, and those types of
mhm,
things, right?
yeah.
So I think the long story short on this point is, again, cash is king, but only if you keep it, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to think about it is, how does this business keep itself surviving? And the business keeps itself surviving because of liquidity. right?
Mm-hmm.
Even
Mm-hmm.
if you take out a $10,000 loan, let's say you use a credit card for a $10,000 purchase, that credit card is going to say to you that on that 10,000, because they're looking to make as much as they can and maximize their return, they're going to say to you that you only have to pay this month $150, right? They're going to allow for you to drip those payments through because that's their business model and how they make money. Meanwhile, that $10,000 that you had in the account is still available for you to pay other expenses as and when they're coming due, right? We have said this time and again that 50% of businesses fail within 5 years, right? That's the past five, right? And the primary reason, one is marketing, and they're not having the correct conversation with their prospects. But two, the reason why they fail is often due to cash flow mismanagement,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at the end of the day, liquidity equals working capital, and that's what you want to preserve first and foremost in your business because that gives you options.
And like you said, for liquidity purposes, I've run across a couple of people who would say, listen, the business right now is doing well, there's money coming in. Why should I use credit? I don't want to owe anybody, right? And this is what we're talking about. This is understanding what leverage means. And
Mm.
this is being in a position where you know that I can use the credit to expand this business and pay my payroll or other things that I may need to make payments for with cash, with using that cash, and still being able to grow because you have that leverage that allows you to utilize the access to the extra cash that you may not necessarily have in your cash or in your cash flow. So don't look at it as, okay, why should I be putting or using credit or loans to really grow the business? Why not just focus on the cash flow? We are looking at leverage. We want you to grow. We want you to have other avenues that allow you to grow the business. And largely for you to grow the business, you need cash. You need access to cash. Unless you are making more than enough that you're able to pay all your monthly expenses and things of that sort and still have cash for you to be able to grow, and there's no limit in terms of how much cash you have to put in for you to grow. But these options allow you to have the capacity to grow while you still use your cash for the things that are immediate and that need to be paid off in cash.
So let's transition. Let's talk about when to use business credit, right? And you want to use business credit for things like revenue generating investments, right? Purchasing inventory, great reason to use credit. Equipment, great reason to use credit. Marketing campaigns, great reason to use credit. Or scaling or other business purchases is a great opportunity to use credit. You know, Eunice, I have a very simple formula, right? It's more of a rule of thumb, but it's a very simple formula. And that is if the return that you're getting is greater than the cost of the capital, you win. So that formula is if the return is greater than the cost of the capital, you are going to win, right?
Yep.
Right. And let's talk about one of the credit vehicles that I love the most, and that's going to be a line of credit, right? Because when you have a line of credit, the approval is already there, right? You don't have to go through the application process. You know, the old expression, stay ready. That way you don't have to get ready. A line of
Yeah.
credit actually helps you with that, right? Personally, I am not against 0% intro APR cards, right? One, you typically, when you're using those intro interest-free cards, they have points that come along with them as well. If you are a business owner, you should hardly ever have to pay for a vacation if you're leveraging the reward system properly. That's
Exactly.
not a
Yeah.
conversation for today, but it is something that you should be leveraging. Why not take advantage of all of the opportunities that are available to you? But last but not least, work with vendors who are going to be reporting, especially those who are reporting to Dun and Bradstreet, right? Don't open up the window in the winter and just let the heat go outside. Be able to make sure that, if I'm squeezing a lemon, I'm going to get juice that I could actually use, right?
Mhm.
And
Definitely.
the point here is that the goal isn't debt, right? When you read Debt Millionaires, it's not just to go out and get debt, but the goal is to control your leverage, right? Because when you don't have business credit, you need the resources, you need the supplies in order to complete a job, right? You're at the Home Depot or Lowe's uh, Pro account, and you're going to be saying to yourself, I need these supplies. Guess what that's going to lead to? That's going to lead to you being in a situation where now you're going to personal guarantee that line of credit because you need it in in urgency leads to bad decisions because you're making them through emotions, and you shouldn't be making decisions about your business through emotions.
Yeah.
And anything to add there, Eunice?
You have said it well. Nope.
Well, let's close out. And the last one that we'll talk about is when to use policy loans, right? Because everyone typically talks about, and I think one of the differences that we're bringing to the table is that we're talking about cash. We always talk about business credit, and now we've added an additional layer of policy loans, right? Now, policy loans are used in different scenarios, right? Bridge financing, right?
Mhm.
Emergency liquidity, no one has to approve your application, right? If there are investment opportunities or you are reinvesting in your business while keeping capital to compound. We mentioned it briefly. Non-direct recognition is something that you want to have in your policy if you are going to be taking out policy loans, right?
Mhm.
We've already stated it a couple of times over, but let's just state it one more time, Eunice. When you are borrowing against a policy loan, the policy itself is the asset that is being leveraged, right, to protect that loan, right? So you are borrowing against the cash value component of the policy, right? When we first learned about this, I was wondering, should I pay for the vehicle cash? Or is there another? Because when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the interest that I would lose by either taking out the loan for the car with Toyota or taking the money out of the bank. I was looking for a solution where I would be able to leverage that cash, but still allow it to grow. And I didn't have any opportunity, so we just purchased the car. We paid it off, right? Today, with what I know, is I would have created an insurance policy and then taken out a loan against that policy to purchase that vehicle because now I have the vehicle and I still have the $50,000 that's now growing and compounding inside of a policy,
Mhm.
right?
Makes sense.
So I'm borrowing against the cash value. The policy is continuing to grow uninterrupted. There is no underwriting and there is no debt debt to income hit because that is not going to be reported to the credit bureaus. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what is a policy loan? Right? It's a private reserve system for entrepreneurs. If you are in business and you aren't leveraging policy loans, I only have one thing to say to you, and I say this with all due respect, but you are cutting yourself short. You're selling yourself short if you aren't leveraging these policy loans, right? And it's night and day when you compare it to a traditional bank loan because there are not going to be any approvals, right? There are excuse me, rate fluctuations, right? Or freezing your credit line during a downturn, right? If we go into a recession and you want to leverage your line of credit, immediately the bank can just lower your limit and tell you that you have to you have to pay them back that money. A lot of people don't think about that when they're looking at lines of credit, but yeah, they can lower your amounts almost immediately.